police spotted at least 5 drones. They buzzed the Eiffel Tower and the U.S. Embassy, among other sites. The second night of such sightings, police on the ground couldn't follow them or determine how they were being controlled. Mysterious.
Our guest is a former Air Force officer who served as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense in the George W. Bush administration, a best-selling author, and senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. Let's welcome Jed Babbin to MidPoint today. Jed, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Jed, I'm going to talk about those drones here in a moment, but I want to ask your opinion and talk a little bit here about what happened late today, a late-breaking story. Apparently, 3 men from Brooklyn, allegedly planning to travel to Syria to join ISIS, taken into custody during FBI terror raids in Brooklyn on Wednesday. Is it fair to say maybe that our intelligence services take a tremendous amount of hits, and we're often told that we're missing things, we're not getting the job done, but something like this proves that there are things working here. We are out there. The intelligence services are finding some of these people, and a good number of them, before they can do damage.
Exactly. I think we got to give them the credit that they are due. I mean, the FBI, the NSA, CIA, they all work together. They're really doing a very good job, well, at least as best anyone can in this environment. It's a very challenging environment, and intelligence, as we talk about all the time, it's always bits and pieces of something. So yeah, there's a little bit of luck involved in this, but there's an awful lot of skill and an awful lot of hard work. I think they need to be congratulated.
Jed, in that challenging environment, though, these were men in Brooklyn. They certainly were from overseas. Is it not fair to say, and people don't want to say this out loud, that at times there is a need to profile? It's a tough word. People don't want to hear it. But if you're really going to get to the bottom of finding killers and finding people who are looking to do evil things, it works sometimes, does it not?
It works more often than it doesn't. And that's really the truth, and people have to face up to that. We have not faced up to that since 9/11. People like the groups like CARE and so forth have dissuaded everybody. You know, they wanted to make this politically incorrect. I mean, it's virtually a hate crime now to try to profile somebody. But this is what you do. This is what you have to do if you're serious about stopping terrorism. And what you do is like, well, Mayor de Blasio in New York has ended the service of the New York Police Department's intelligence unit, which was going to places where these things breed, like into some mosques and into some other gatherings where people are of the Islamic faith and they get the intelligence that they need. I mean, you don't go, you know, to use the ridiculous example, you don't go to a bunch of blue-haired grandmas in Minneapolis playing cards one day to try to find out about terrorist attacks. You go to where they emanate from, which is, for good or for ill, obviously for ill, it's from the Islamic community.
Some of the news reports coming out about this event are once again using the phrase lone wolf. Jed, in your experience, isn't that a misnomer in so many cases, and even in what we're looking at right here?
Yeah, it's a tremendous misnomer. I mean, there may be people who are acting independently. When you're talking about a lone wolf, you're talking about somebody like Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the Murrah building in Oklahoma City so many years ago. But the point of the matter is, these people are networked. They work together. They think together. They talk to each other. And that's, frankly, that's how the intelligence comes out, you know, that you're able to stop some of these people. You know, you've got the ISIS people we know are targeting a huge Somali community in Minneapolis. In Minnesota, they've got something like 30,000 Somali refugees. You know, these people are being targeted for radicalization, and that's the kind of thing that you need to, you know, whether you're profiling or not, that's the likely source of intelligence that's going to be valuable and actionable. So that's where you go to get the intelligence.
I got about a minute left here before we take a break. I talked about it. We mentioned this at the beginning. Drones spotted over Paris, landmarks for the second straight night. Is this not a little bit of a warning sign here? Because, look, drones are nice. They take wonderful pictures, but I don't want to scare anybody, but let's be honest here. They can carry a lot more.
Well, they can. They can carry a lot more. They can carry cameras. They can carry weapons. I mean, that's why you have the huge embarrassment of a drone being landed, I'm told, by accident by some civilian in the White House.
You're not buying that by accident, are you?
Well, I never do. You know, there's just so few things that are coincidences in this life. But, you know, say it was. But the point of the matter is it's a big wake-up call. What's going on in Paris, Lord only knows. And I don't think he's frankly involved. But the real issue here is, are the French taking, are the Brits taking, all the rest of the countries we're allied with, are they taking sufficient actions to forestall the danger? That I really can't tell you. I don't know.
All right, well, it brings up an interesting idea as to what we may have to do about drones coming down the road, but we'll talk about that in a moment and certainly a little bit more. Hold tight just a couple of minutes here, Jed. Once they were employed by the government in seeking out covert killers. Now they serve a very different master in the war on cyber threats. But are these ex-members of the National Security Agency making your life any safer? They're finding new ways to go to work. They're putting their skills to work, but not necessarily for the way some people might like. We'll talk about this and so much more on the intelligence side of matters when we continue right here on MidPoint. All right, back to work with best-selling author, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense in the George W. Bush administration, senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, Jed Babbin. Jed, before we move on, and I just want to go back one more thing to the drones here. Do you think that we're doing enough, and are we prepared for what may be the next weapon, if you will, that homegrown terrorists, people coming from other countries, that they may use against us here at home? Are we prepared?
Well, there's no real reason to believe we are prepared, but there are a lot of people who are a lot smarter than you and me thinking about this sort of thing. The real issue now is the FAA is apparently going to issue regulations. They've issued some that make drone flights in America legal in a commercial sense, and it will be a lot more versatile a threat at that point because who knows who's going to operate the drones. It's really just a question of what you can do with a drone, and you can do a whole lot with one. All sorts of things from biological weapons to cameras to you name it. So it's going to be a considerable threat. The real issue is, can the FBI and companies stay ahead of it? And, so far they're doing pretty good.
When we talk about threats, I want to go back a little bit to the Mall of America threat that came in the last few days where they talked about getting to a shopping mall. But then there's shopping malls, there's sporting events, there are large gatherings, there are conventions where people gather. There are so many ways for the terrorists to not only hurt us, but to scare us. Are we ready for those? Are we doing a good enough job, in your opinion, knowing about all of these places where anybody can gather? Some people are just scared to death of going out of their house real soon.
Well, I think people like that are clearly overreacting. I think we're doing a lot to protect ourselves. You have the state, local, and federal Bureau of Investigation. All of the state law enforcement agencies work together pretty well in most places. So I don't think that the threat needs to be exaggerated. I think we need to calm down a little bit about that. And quite frankly, ISIS wants to see what kind of reaction we make. So if we all run around like chicken with heads cut off, in response to a threat against a mall in Minneapolis, I just don't think we're being sensible. So the issue really comes down to what's the big threat? What do we have to face? And right now, I don't think it's much different from what we've faced since 9/11.
Jed, just out of curiosity, what's your experience here? If you have, let's say, 10 threats that come from all these different groups, what do you believe? Maybe one might actually be real and the others are just meant to get a reaction?
Well, that's probably a good ratio. But again, which is credible and which is not depends on what your intelligence is telling you, what the intercepts of communication is telling you, what the people who you're watching are looking like they're about to do. Is there a lot of so-called terrorist chatter on the internet? There are a lot of things that go into that. So, you can't just say, well, I'm going to look at this one and not those other 9. You have to figure out which is which.
Let's move on to cybercrime. The FBI Cybercrime Division head, Joe Demarest, says the agency is aware of 60 different cyber threat groups linked to nation states. Honestly, I was a little bit surprised to hear a number that low.
Well, yeah, I am too. I think it's probably a lot higher than that. Those are probably the ones that are most active or most threatening in the FBI's estimation. So I think there's a lot more out there. I mean, look, we know the government of China, for example, attacks our internet, our defense organizations, our intelligence organizations, defense contractors, on average about 1,000 times a day. So this stuff is not new, but it's constantly evolving. And that's one of the big things we have as a problem in this country right now. We have a lot of things that are pretty cheap with which enemies can threaten us, like cyber warfare. A couple of guys with a laptop, really smart guys, you can do a lot. You can do a lot of damage. It costs an enormous amount of money to protect against those threats. So that's an imbalance. That's an asymmetry in warfare that the enemy has to their advantage. So what do we do about it? Well, we just have to keep protecting ourselves, maybe find cheaper ways to do it.
I got about a minute left here. It turns out that a lot of companies in Silicon Valley are hiring former employees of the National Security Agency to help them protect their networks against hackers, but also protect them against the government. Does that concern you?
Well, yes and no. I think it's a free market, it's a free society. I mean, we talked about, shopping malls and all the rest of that. We have to be free. And, people are going to go out and try to protect their own interests, regardless of what the government's interest is. And I think that's legitimate. I don't think we want the government to be controlling of much more than it really has to control. So we need to be able to be very vigilant in that. And it's like Ben Franklin said, those who would sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither.
Would you be surprised at all? I think I wouldn't be if I knew that somebody was watching my computer right now at this very moment and watching yours as well.
Ed, all I can tell you is so little surprises me anymore. But on the other hand, I hope those guys aren't so totally bored, because I don't do anything exciting.
So we're not going to learn anything from your Twitter feed, right? Your Facebook feed's not going to have anything embarrassing on it.
Anybody who's watching that is going to be sleepy before they know it.
Oh, man. Okay, we're going to hold you to that, by the way, next time if we ever do find any of those. Jed Babbin, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, take care. It is a nondescript building in Chicago. It holds a secret of the Chicago Police Department. What actually they found in there shocked a number of people. It shocked an international investigation, too, because they were trying to find out a little bit about the truth. It provides a glimpse into how justice is delivered in the city where Al Capone resided, and also perhaps many others as well. It's a frightening tale of what happens to some, but then again, some say, what exactly law enforcement needs to do in order to stay ahead of the bad guys. We'll get to that and so much more when we continue right here on MidPoint.